Different by design. Studebaker is. Studebaker is. Studebaker is.
Thank you very much, Pat, and thank you guys for foregoing your spring yard work and coming inside to spend this afternoon with me. Let me make sure I have this thing on, and we have the phaser operating here. Oh, good. We're good to go here. Landaus, Tours, and Broughams. Oh, my. And with apologies to Judy Garland, we tried to get her to make an appearance, but she was not available. We often get asked about the different body styles, especially you might see we have a station wagon from the horse-drawn era on display in the museum, and then people think, well, wait a minute, there's a station wagon from the automobile era, it looks nothing, there's obviously some relation, but what's the difference? So we thought we'd address this in this program today. And just a word on body styles. Almost everything from automotive design from the early 20th century really was an offshoot of the horse-drawn era. In fact, many of the techniques, as we'll see here, bodybuilding in the early automotive era wasn't that different from building a coach in the horse-drawn era. It's like many of the same technologies and methods were used. And if you really want to go down a rabbit hole, there's a wonderful book we have in our archives, Carriage Terminology, a historical dictionary by Don Burkbiley. And we're going to go through this whole thing today, so I understand we have till 5 o'clock. Is that right, Pat? Okay, we may have to abridge this just a little bit, but just every possible body style from the carriage era is listed in here, and it was invaluable in putting this program together today. Well, so we're going to lean into the title of our talk here, and we're going to start. We'll see, we have a Landau, a Tourer, and a Brougham. And these are, as we see, some very different styles. Here we see kind of an open model. The touring car, again, kind of a derivative from similar open vehicles in the horse-drawn era. And the Brougham, this is actually President Harrison's Brougham on display out in the museum's gallery. And that's, as I mentioned, you saw how thick this book was. There's a whole lexicon of different terms. And you'll also see, too, much like, rock and roll was coined in the mid-1950s, I think it was Alan Freed, to a particular genre of music, and then you see how that definition kind of expanded as new people got to be more experimental, and you see progressive rock and punk rock. And you see in the automotive and carriage design area, they would take these, kind of the rude body style, and you'd have, this manufacturer's interpretation on it, and then sometimes, we'll see later, the terminology is then more of a marketing term because it bears not even really a passing resemblance to the original body style that it was meant to note here. But we're going to start with a Landau. A Landau, let me turn to my page here. This design actually originated in Germany in the mid-16th century, and it's somewhat similar. If you go back and see the Lincoln carriage, that is a barouche, but that is a 4-passenger vehicle. The passengers face each other. It has a folding top, which in the carriage era they would call a falling top. What we call a convertible today. A separate driver area. You see the driver would be perched, kind of like the chauffeur up here in front, and you have room for the passengers and some privacy in the back. And the Landau is also one of those styles that transcended into the automobile era. I don't know if anyone had a Ford LTD in the 1970s, and they had like the Landau model. And again, it did not have a falling top. In fact, that was more the marketing terminology than an actual body style. So you mentioned the Landau, separate driver's compartment. You see, this is actually President Grant's Landau. This is a Brewster vehicle, but the front half of the top could fold down. The back half of the top could fold down, and then you have the glass windows which could recess into the door. Really a very utilitarian vehicle, very similar to our convertible body styles you have today. Studebaker marketed a version of this, the French Landau. As we mentioned, this design originated in Germany in the mid-16th century, but we see much more of a formal, much more of a weather-hardy body style. The back half folds down, but you see much more glass. This is a very expensive vehicle back during the horse-drawn era, and they only marketed this for a short time. As they started tapering off the body styles in the carriage making trade into the automobile era, early 1900s, This one went away. I guess it was assumed the more affluent customers would probably be looking towards buying an automobile as something pulled by a horse at that time. So that is the Landau. But it also made a brief appearance in the automobile era. We see this is a 1920 Studebaker Light 6. This particular is called the 3-passenger Landau Roadster. And you see, very similar to the French Landau, you have actual glass windows here. And there's a distinction. We'll cover that more when we talk about touring cars and roadsters. But note the glass windows, and you have the semi-collapsible top there. So really, as we see here, the entire top folds back, converting Landau Roadster, not the Landau Roadster, they're calling it like it's its name, converting Landau Roadster into an open 3-passenger roadster, and room under the rear deck for tires and luggage. Why did they have to note that there is room for extra tires? Well, tire technology was pretty poor back in the day, and having a flat tire, it was just a matter of when, not a matter of if it was going to happen when you took your car out. This body style was actually discontinued in the early 1920s. By name, but as we'll see, it kind of reappears in some different names throughout the 1920s. The whole convertible models, the falling top models, if you will, they went by several different names during this period. Okay, let's move on to tourers. The touring car. For much of the early 20th century, the predominant body style you would see was basically an open 4-passenger automobile, 4 to 6-passenger automobile, the touring car. And pretty simple, it's your basic body with a folding roof. Your weather protection consisted of whatever you chose to bundle up with and some rudimentary side curtains. And when we say side curtains, these were sheets of kind of clear plastic. I think Isinglass was one of the brand names they used. And these would essentially snap into little buttons on the sides of the car in an attempt to keep the water and elements outside. They weren't terribly successful at that, mind you, but these were still open models, were the most popular. They were the most inexpensive, and they sold fairly extensively. The 2-passenger version of these, you'd see that the Roadster, and the Roadster has kind of become a kind of standard vernacular for any old kind of little runabout type vehicle. But it is a specific body style, which we will see a roadster, 2 or 3-passenger automobile, kind of a basic automobile, but again, it would have the folding top and the side curtains. The touring car body style stuck around until 1931 in Studebaker's automotive lineup. This is a 1931 Studebaker President touring car. We see still very similar to the teens era cars here. It's got the folding top again. No roll-up windows. You have the side curtains. Again, a very elegant looking automobile here too, but still this body style, this was the final year for its offering in 1931, as something with a little more weather protection was coming down the pipe. Another fun part of this particular automobile here, notice the white walls, double white walls. Now, if you really want to impress your friends and neighbors here, don't just keep the outside of the tire clean and white. You got to go in and address the inside too, so you are looking your absolute best. Presumably, if you would bring your touring car out to our Cars and Coffee coming up in just a month or so away. The Brougham. The Brougham is, again, another one of those body styles that went through a fair number of iterations, and again, it still sticks with us into a fairly recent automotive landscape. Some of you may remember the Cadillac Eldorado Brougham from the late 1950s. Again, I think it was Ford with the LTD Brougham. I don't know why the LTD got the benefit of all these old carriage model names for there, but they sold a lot of LTDs, so who are we to argue with the Ford Motor Company? And I'm trying to remember another one. I think GM on their mid-sized personal luxury cars from the 70s and 80s also had a Brougham name adapted to one of those. You may remember one of those in your driveway. But the Brougham, and not Brougham, just Brougham, just pretend B-R-O-M-E, that's the easiest way to get through that word. This was named for England's Lord Brougham, who commissioned this London coach builder to build a vehicle of his design back in 1838. Kind of similar to what we saw earlier with the Landau, where the driver sits outside, but it's really a very personal vehicle. It is offering privacy. You can see why President Benjamin Harrison would maybe want a Brougham for touring around the streets of Washington, D.C. The blind quarter, no quarter window in the Brougham, and that's kind of one of its hallmarks in the horse-drawn era. Had full frame doors with windows, and again, a very weather-tight vehicle. The Broughams typically sat only 2 or 3 people, so really much smaller vehicle than we saw with the coaches or the broach we've seen earlier. And this also leads into another discussion of a term that we hear a lot of in the automotive area, and that is the coupe or the coupe. And I was doing a little more research on that term. Coupe, obviously a French term, but that literally means to cut. And the coupe, with its shorter and usually a 2-door model, in the automotive area, you think the Studebaker Starlight Coupe, for example. Again, a shorter model. The coupe means to cut, and it essentially meant a full coach, which would have been a 4-passenger vehicle, but the French applied that term to vehicles that were shortened or narrowed, altered from the full-size model to produce a new body style. And the coupe, we still see coupes on the road today. We get into Studebaker's automotive era, and other manufacturers adhere to this too. Note the blind quarter on the Studebaker miniature Brougham. Then we see the blind quarter on this 1931 Studebaker Brougham. You'll see the other sedan models would have a quarter window here. And then Studebaker upset the apple cart in 1932 and introduced the St. Regis Brougham. Now, you'll notice the St. Regis Brougham, now we're talking about a 2-place automobile, very similar to the horse-drawn Brougham, but they've got a quarter window back there. I guess they thought the wraparound C-pillar right there offered some semblance of privacy that resembled the original Brougham design. And the Victoria. Would anyone care to guess who the Victoria may have been named for? Anyone? Queen Victoria, that's an excellent guess. And it would be correct. It was not named after Victoria Principal, the star of Dallas back in the day, as some people have thought over the years. But the Victoria indeed was named in honor of Queen Victoria, and it also featured, in its original design, it featured a mounted driver, as in the driver was on the horse, not on the vehicle. And it also had a revised dashboard, another one of the great euphemisms of automobile or horse-drawn era technology. The dashboard, that's this piece out in front of you, and its job is to keep the horse leavings and other road spray off of the passengers. But the Victoria, that was an offshoot of the Cabriolet, which we will see that in a minute. Talk more about that in a minute. And then again, the Victoria also saw its name, again, more of a marketing term, because we certainly don't see the driver here sitting off on the hood of the car or anything like that. But Studebaker applied that to some of their more formal coupe and kind of coupe sedan models, the smaller 2-door models. But you got a little elegance with the Landau bars up here too, and a little more of an upscale offering. And the Cabriolet. This particular model had a great evolution. It started off as actually a 2-wheeled vehicle, similar to a cart that would have been pulled kind of by a single horse, and then it evolved into a 4-wheeled soft-top carriage, but without doors. The Cabriolet, see a good example right there. That's essentially what you see, a pretty basic vehicle, a fair weather vehicle. And that name also carried over into the automobile area. In fact, Studebaker continued offering Cabriolet models up until the early 1930s. But we see, again, a very different vehicle than what you would see in the horse-drawn era. We'll talk more about the Cabriolets in a minute, but they had the folding top. Again, how is this different from the Landau we just saw earlier? I'm guessing you'll have to talk to Studebaker's admin to figure out why they chose to name it the way they did. And the aforementioned station wagon. We see here the station wagon. Pretty simple, it's a wagon, and its original intent was to transport visitors arriving at the train station back to their ultimate destination, whether a boarding house, a hotel, or even back home. And as its name implies, there's several different variations on it too, but usually a little more roomy. Some of the models are extension front station wagon we have on display in the gallery, has more room for luggage. You'd see some with roof racks. But that was its basic duty. It was really to haul people from the station elsewhere. And of course, who doesn't remember people my age taking many extended vacations in the way back of the family station wagon, perhaps your folks even spraying for the Studebaker V8 Regal Conestoga station wagon. Unfortunately, there's still a few holdouts on still marketing station wagons in this day and age, and despite the onslaughts from SUVs and minivans, station wagon is still with us, but you do have to go look for them. So we need to talk about body construction. How was this done in the early automotive age? As I mentioned, it was very similar to the practices of the horse-drawn era. And this is for a Studebaker factory photo from 1924, and we see this is actually the body frame for probably a Studebaker touring car or something like that. We see this is all framed in wood. We see the other wood parts here, and that was the basis for your body structure. And then the talented Studebaker workmen, some of whom probably, if you ask them, that didn't change too much from the horse-drawn age up until into automobiles. You're essentially making a frame, and you're sheathing the frame in the metal. Some of it would be diaform, some of it was probably just hammered out, different areas hammered out over a form. And then as you're framing in here, I love this, they are tacking in the quarter panels here in the roof, and it's literally, they're just taking the pre-cut sheet of metal and they're tacking it to the wooden frame. Then you see the other portions to fill out the body, where if you were joining pieces, you'd have lead in the seams, so your paint finish would appear smooth. And we see we have the two-place automobiles here. We see some, I believe these could be sedan bodies getting ready to go back in the background. And then you keep going down the workstations, and now we're starting to get some paint applied. And notice the bracing in here, so all the dimensions, so when the time comes for your doors to be put on, everything fits, and then everything heads to final assembly. And up until the early 1930s, that was pretty much how state-of-the-art for automobile manufacturing technology. Everyone used this. There were some automakers are experimenting with all steel bodies, but that was still very much in its infancy. But that would soon change. Okay, as we mentioned, the early automotive age, you would see a lot of touring cars and a lot of times the runabouts. And let's face it, this body doesn't look too much different from a two-person carriage. If you watch reruns of Little House on the Prairie, you'd see Michael Landau trucking into town on something that pretty much looked like this without the electric motor. The runabout kind of evolved into the roadster body we mentioned earlier, just a simple two-place car, not much weather protection. And the touring car was also, the touring car, essentially the four-place version, in terms of weather protection and configuration to the roadster. See, this is our Flanders 20 roadster here. Again, you have not much by way of weather protection. You have a simple folding top. You'd have little buttons in there where you could insert the side curtains to protect yourself. But that was very popular. People were accustomed to being out in the open, the horse-drawn era. You didn't see many enclosed horse-drawn era vehicles. And this was also prior to the advent of safety glass. Prior to the early 1930s, glass windows in automobiles were just like plate glass in your house. It was, it shattered, it was very sharp, and we've heard stories of automobile accidents from this era. The flying debris, the flying shards of glass, would cause probably more injuries than the actual trauma from the impact. And people just were not terribly comfortable with being in enclosed vehicles. And also sedans, enclosed vehicles, were much more expensive than the comparable open-top models. The exact opposite of what happens today. But as we got into the 1920s, Studebaker began, as every other manufacturer, trying to market more enclosed automobiles. We see here really different interpretations. We mentioned the coupe, adding a roof here. We have the K-body coupe here for 5 passengers. The Country Club coupe, the distinction here is this one has the glass visor, and this Country Club coupe for 2 passengers has the visor integral with the roof section there. I don't know if a Country Club membership actually came with the Country Club coupe. You'd think that would be a natural promotion. But you saw manufacturers really start to spread their wings during the 1920s as they began introducing new body styles to try and attract people, more buyers into the showroom. Studebaker tried to bridge the gap between the closed car the closed car market and then lure open car buyers into maybe trying out something, and that was the Duplex phaeton. And there's that phaeton name again here because not really many components of the phaeton, but with the name's roots in Greek mythology and the legend applied that goes with that name, perhaps they thought it was a valuable sales tool. And the phaeton and the Duplex roadster, what they did is essentially take the touring car, but they added a fixed roof on there. And this was much more functional than the folding tops. It was actually integral with the body structure, both the roadster and the seven-passenger phaeton. And the windows were actually like roll top, like the screens in your house. They just rolled up into the roof. If weather got bad, you could just roll them down, snap them in place, and they advertise hence the duplex nature of the automobile. We see here demonstrating the operation of the Duplex phaeton. And I got to say, that's really kind of a brilliant innovation from Studebaker's part. Again, you're trying to overcome the resistance to a closed body style, and they really bridge the gap. The Studebaker roller curtains are a distinct and completely new innovation introduced for the first time by Studebaker as a feature of the new Duplex models. And indeed, the Duplex would hang on. They only had this body style in production for 2 years, 1925 and 1926. But then the times they say they were changing, as we shall see. So you look inside the interior of a Duplex phaeton. Very comfortable seats. We have one on display out in the museum's gallery, our 1925 Big Six Duplex phaeton. A nice close look. Some companies actually marketed accessory tops for touring cars and roadsters, where we have a 22 Big Six in the basement with a top made by the Englander Mattress Company. And looking at how that thing's put together, you can tell a mattress company was definitely involved in its production. And it's this massive padded top that would be affixed and attached to the structure of the car, and it's certainly an interesting looking item. Ungainly is another word you might look to it, but the Duplex actually was a much more harmonious body design, and a fair number of these have survived to the present day. Okay, we talked about the Cabriolet earlier. Again, the same illustration. We see the Cabriolet this time in its top-down configuration here. So the Cabriolet really, you have the same fixed windshield frame and you had roll-up windows in the doors, but you had the top that folded down to give you some open-air motoring. Essentially, we would call that very similar to the convertibles today. And the Cabriolet body, as I mentioned, disappeared in the early 1930s from Studebaker's model lineup. Anyone know who this is? Actually, I believe, a famous celebrity from the 1920s era. Anyone care to guess? The note on there, I think, said Raymond Chandler. So getting back to the brougham discussion here. Here we have the previous picture of the brougham. This is comparison to the comparable 5-passenger sedan from the same era. The sedan, you have the quarter window back there, but the brougham has the blind quarters. And that body style remained in production through 1931 as a 4-door model. Well, talking about the touring car earlier, I mentioned the 1931 was the final year for the touring car offering, and that was because in 1932, Studebaker introduced its new convertible sedan. Now, doesn't that sound like a fancy piece of equipment right there? The touring car, that's old-fashioned. It's been around since the early 1900s, and let's be honest, driving a touring car is fun for the first 20 minutes, but after that, you kind of look for some weather protection if you have a windy day like today. But the convertible sedan, my goodness, you got a form-fitting padded top with frame windows and that roll up and down. You have a much more substantial body structure. Surely this is the way to go if you want your open-air motoring, and indeed it does. However, the convertible sedans did have a couple disadvantages. One was the price penalty. Whereas the touring car was traditionally on the lower end of the price lineup, the convertible sedan suddenly became the most expensive. Studebaker, for their part, did not produce those in-house. They actually farmed out the construction of the convertible sedan bodies to Central Manufacturing in southern Indiana, who was a subsidiary of the Auburn Automobile Company. I believe it was Logansport they were in. But Central Manufacturing produced the bodies for Auburn, and they also did contract work for Studebaker on the convertible sedans. In fact, there's a couple items, if you look closely, a couple of hardware items that you see some crossovers between some products that they made for Auburn and Cord, and also in the Studebaker convertible sedans. Okay, other offerings in 1932. We see, we mentioned sedans. They actually produced two different sedan models, the 5-passenger sedan and the 7-passenger sedan. Now, with a basic grade school math, you can probably figure out the difference between the two models right there. But the easiest way to tell is look at the size of the rear quarter window. The short window for the 5-passenger sedans, and then the larger rear window for the 7-passenger sedans. And how did they get the extra 2 passengers? The 7-passenger models, that's $5. You can give that to Pat on your way out. Thank you so much. The 5-passenger sedans were configured normally. The 7-passenger sedans had 2 jump seats that folded up in the rear passenger compartment. You want to have smaller passengers in the jump seats. So if you have one of those, choose your passengers carefully. And we get back to one of my favorites, the St. Regis Brougham. So we mentioned, now the St. Regis Brougham, not as traditional with the Brougham styling, as you can definitely see who's in the back seat here, but Studebaker made a big deal out of this innovative new body styling. Coincidentally, this was under Studebaker's stewardship of Pierce Arrow. And if you do a quick search on the Googles, you'll find that there's this Pierce Arrow version of this body. Again, no parts interchange between the two, but you can see they were definitely looking over each other's shoulders, certainly in the body design department there. What characterizes St. Regis Brougham is this extra long front door. And I don't know if you could, we have ours on display, this very car out display in the gallery, but you look at it, the front door is like a mile wide. And they say, well, it was to offer increased accessibility to the rear seat passengers without disturbing the front seat passengers. Well, you'd have to be pretty skinny to make that happen, but I suppose it's possible. But it just, especially on the long wheelbase President models, it just makes for a stunning design. It just makes that length and that expanse of the window just makes the car look so much longer and lower in an era when cars were not, you know, they were still trying to figure out how to lower the cars both physically and visually. And the St. Regis Brougham body style only remained in production from 1932 and 1933. I think only about a dozen of those still survive today in all models across both model years. Another new body that came down the pipe for Studebaker in 1934 was the Land Cruiser. And this was an era when the 30s are such a fascinating time to study automotive engineering, automotive design. Studebaker was still a couple of years out from hiring Raymond Loewy to handle their body styling. General Motors and Chrysler had just established their art and color, their design departments. Essentially, just a few years prior, the whole field of industrial design was really just starting to gain a foothold in all areas of consumer products. And the Studebaker body engineers, with some help from the designers who created the Pierce Arrow, Silver Arrow show cars, came up with this brand new fastback design for Studebaker bodies. And this was available across all 3 models, the Dictator, Commander, and President. And also, they reworked the sedans to have this unique 4-place rear window and the fastback styling. Absolutely stunning automobiles, and only about a handful, I'd say 5 or 6 of those remain today. But really kind of pointing forward to where automobile design was going. Things were getting more streamlined, cars were getting lower, and people were becoming accustomed to what's the new design that's going to be coming out. Well, I mentioned all the wood and woodworkers that were involved in making automobile bodies in the 1920s. All of that changed in the 1930s as the manufacturers figured out, you know, it's a lot cheaper if you're building lots of cars to make things out of steel, and also technology as far as stamping technology and steel production. General Motors came out with the all-steel top in 1935. Not in all divisions, but suddenly you didn't have the fabric insert in the middle of the roof, which always shrunk and leaked as the cars got older. They figured out how to manufacture the whole roof from one sheet of steel. And Studebaker went even further in 1936 and 1937. They're not saying if they're the first, but it's definitely the largest single sheet of steel used in any automobile. No more wood was involved in making bodies. All the sections were now steel and welded. And this had a couple of effects. One, it really put the pinch on some of the lower volume manufacturers because tooling up for a steel stamping of that size takes massive investment. You know, you saw the proliferation of bodies Studebaker offered in the 1920s, and many others did too. You know, when you're dealing with a bunch of craftsmen, it's like, okay, we're going to make this, make this. It's very easy to adapt. The tooling investment for Studebaker and everyone else in the industry was just massive as all steel bodies came in and manufacturing techniques improved. So we see here, this is, you know, what before would have been, you know, many different stampings and some floorboards that you had to screw in. Now you had one big stamping for the floor pan, and to which you welded the sills and everything else in the rest of the body structure. Massive jigs, and every time you change the body design, you would have to adjust or order new jigs and change your tooling up, and that's how bodies were manufactured essentially from the mid-30s onward, but just a massive investment to do that. And that's, well, you see Studebaker for the 20s and 30s, they were changing body designs every couple of years. In the 1950s, you suddenly saw the same basic body remain in production for close to a decade, if not more in certain examples for Studebaker. Just the investment in tooling and retooling got so high with the advent of the all-steel body. The convertible sedan body came back for Studebaker in 1938, and again they went back to central manufacturing and said, hey, we'd like some convertible sedans on our new Raymond Loewy design 1938 models, and central manufacturing said sure. So they sent down the sedans. They were modified by Central, sent back to South Bend, and a fairly recent addition to our collection, conveniently also on display in the museum galleries after the program. See a 1939 model here as well. Again, we talk about low production and how these were the touring cars of the 20s, which, you know, same basic configuration, but now these were the most expensive cars in the Studebaker lineup. They only made about 400 of these cars, 1938 and 1939, all told. And in fact, the 39 models were made essentially with leftover 1938 convertible sedan bodies. They put on the 39 front ends, but they still had the 38 instrument panels. And, but still, if anyone knows where a 1939 President convertible sedan is, please let us know, because no known survivors have been spoken of since the 1950s, when an ad appeared in an issue of Motor Trend magazine in 1953. A gentleman named Mr. Albert Benson from San Francisco advertised his 1939 President convertible sedan, and he wanted the princely sum, I believe it was $700 for it. Now, granted, you know, when you think about what a used car sold for in 1953, that was a large chunk of change. You know, you could probably pick up a Model A Ford in 1953 for about 35 bucks, but still, no one knows what happened to that car, and we'd like to think that if it was around in 1953, it's still hiding in some garage or collection out on the West Coast, but we have not heard of it since then. So if you know where one of those is, please let us know. Come on. Studebaker's 1941 models. Studebaker was on a 2-year styling cycle at this time. The 41s got very similar bodies to the 1940 models, but you got some freshening in design. In particular, Studebaker introduced 2 new 4-door sedan models for 1941. You had, over here, you had the Land Cruiser model. Note, we just talked about Land Cruisers before, no fastback design, but Studebaker also offered the more conservative cruising sedan body. So you could have your choice of 2 different 4-door sedans. What's the difference? Well, you see, the cruising sedan has the suicide doors, if you will, with the rear quarter window, while the Land Cruiser body has the front hinge doors with no rear quarter window in the bodywork. They had functioning rear vent windows. And you may think, why bother to tool up for 2 different sedan models? Well, apparently there was buyers who really preferred the older cruising sedan style, while some people were really interested in the new Land Cruiser style. And Studebaker, for their part, they actually took the cruising sedan body and modified it to make the Land Cruiser, and they made new rear doors, and everyone seemed happy. And Studebaker actually continued that practice for 1941 and 1942. Another new body for Studebaker 1941 was the sedan coupe. And again, we talk about mixing the names for marketing purposes. Well, now we've talked about sedans, we've talked about coupes, and now you put them together and bake a cake and you get a sedan coupe here. The sedan coupe, a mid-1941 offering, but a 2-door model, kind of the slanted or rakish B-pillar there. But it also had the distinction of being one of the earliest uses of a curved one-piece windshield in automotive production. Prior to this, the only other mass-produced, and you could quibble mass-produced automobile with a curved one-piece windshield was a 1935 Chrysler Imperial CW. I think it was their 135-inch wheelbase model. They only produced about 500 of those, but here Studebaker was offering the curved one-piece windshield as standard equipment. Now you may think this doesn't sound like a big deal. It's a big deal. It's a piece of glass that goes around the corner. But every other car till then, you either had a flat plane of glass in front of you, or you had two flat pieces with this divider bar in the middle that managed to hide telephone poles and other things as you were trying to drive along. So this was a big deal. This was a big deal for Studebaker to come out with that innovation.
When did the running boards disappear?
I will get to that after we're done here. So. That actually segues nicely. We get in after World War II, and Studebaker, as many of you are aware, first by far with a post-war car, and they had all new body styles, many designs courtesy of the Raymond Loewy studios available after World War II. We see the body, the famous Starlight Coupe here, more on that in a minute, a convertible, the business coupe, basic four-door sedan model, and the Land Cruiser. And Studebaker's, again, there's that name again, Land Cruiser, which we saw in 1941 and 42. And we saw Studebaker use this body format where you had the host of two-door sport models, if you will, the convertibles, and you had the regular shorter wheelbase sedan, and then you had the upscale long wheelbase Land Cruiser model. And we see Land Cruiser was the top of the line. You got all the bells and whistles. And what Studebaker did was they made longer rear doors for the Land Cruiser. That's how you spot the Land Cruiser. It has the vent windows from 47 to 54. Had a longer rear roof, an extra, lengthy body, much more legroom in the back seat. And they continued to use the same basic body through 1952. And the Land Cruiser name hung around in various forms until 54 and 55, depending on where you want to look. But the Starlight Coupe was the star of the show. Its four-piece wraparound back window, the turret top, if you will, was a Studebaker exclusive and still one of the most popular Studebaker models today. And it's a fun bit of Studebaker trivia. If anyone asks you when Studebaker introduced the Starlight Coupe, it's a trick question because they introduced the body in 1947. They did not start calling them Starlight Coupes until 1949. So I don't know how you're going to win your bar bet and your free beer, but answer with both and see what the gentleman who asked you comes back with, because he probably owes you a drink either way. The business coupe, another extinct body style. Who remembers business coupes tooling? Who remembers traveling salesmen? Anyone? Yeah, Dave Lawver. Dave, I think you were I think you tried to sell me Amway a couple weeks ago, now that I think about it. The business coupe was just that, for the traveling businessman. A two-seat model with an expansive trunk, so you could drive, the Fuller Brush man coming around. Maybe he's driving a Studebaker, but you keep your samples and your wares in the trunk, and just meant for that specific purpose. But again, the business coupe actually disappeared. The last one the Studebaker built was 1951. And we see a lot of fun body styles that we don't have anymore. I've already talked to, we don't have cabriolets anymore. We don't have, Landaus, business coupes, gone. It's hard for me to get excited about an SUV, but give me a business coupe any day of the week. Studebaker even looked at getting back into the station wagon market, which they had not really touched on since their horse-drawn era. But they experimented with a wood-bodied station wagon after World War II. They ultimately did not enter this into production. This is the prototype, which the museum rescued from the Studebaker Proving Ground back in the 1970s. And after a whirlwind 32-year restoration, we finished it in 2012 for the Studebaker Drivers Club International Meet. People have often asked, why didn't they go into production? It's certainly an attractive car, and certainly the practicality of a station wagon. Well, we've heard a couple different stories on that. One is Studebaker had enough capacity for either the convertible or the station wagon, and they opted to produce the convertible. Looking how their body capacity in other years, it probably is true that they only had so many square feet in the body plan to build those. And also, wood-bodied station wagons are just a pain to produce. They're, you probably have to find all the woodworking guys who retired after you got out of the wood frame body business and fitting it in the wood. And they're also very high maintenance vehicles. You'd have to think of owning a wood boat, but you don't have it on a trailer in your garage during winter. This is year round, so every couple of years you have to tighten up the wood. You have to refinish it. You have to, the wood would rot eventually. And then I think it was a wise move. As we found out with the restoration, rebuilding a wood-bodied station wagon was certainly a labor-intensive process, and we can appreciate what they went through on the production line. Another new design from Studebaker for 1952 was the hardtop. And Studebaker was a little late to the ball game for this. For a company that really branded itself as a styling leader, GM, I think it was the Buick Riviera hardtop, 1949, if I'm not mistaken. I'm looking at Dar Davis, he's nodding at me. And this design was meant to mimic a convertible with the top up. And you'll notice frameless windows, no B-pillar, and again, much like a convertible with the top up. Studebaker dubbed it the Starliner. Someone certainly earned their pay in the advertising department that day. And in one of the greatest euphemisms in automotive technology, in automotive history, we have the graceful hardtop convertible. Someone tell me what is convertible about this model, unless we're counting rolling down the windows. The top doesn't go down. It's just mimicking a convertible with the top up. But certainly a handsome design, and hardtops are all the rage. I own a 64 Studebaker Daytona hardtop. My dad bought one of those brand new, and after a couple years of ownership, he had to sell it because my mom was pregnant with my brother, and then that was a series of four-door sedans and station wagons for the rest of my childhood. I still blame my brother for this, but my dad still maintains that was the car that he wished they hadn't sold. But as he described to me when I told him I wanted to buy a hardtop, he said, oh, he's like, you know, it's all the rattles and leaks of a convertible, but the top doesn't go down. He wasn't wrong. Also on the heels of the Starliner hardtop in 1952, Studebaker did get into the station wagon market, but with the Conestoga, the all-steel wagon. This was new for 1954. And Studebaker certainly reached back into their past with the Conestoga name. And as station wagons go, these were fairly well-engineered cars. From a practical standpoint, the Studebaker body was relatively narrow. In fact, it's been said the Studebaker president, Harold Vance, had this thing against wide cars, and he didn't want Studebakers to be these wide behemoths. Unfortunately, it wasn't really that competitive with the other station wagons from the market as far as carrying capacity. But no other station wagon on the market could boast styling by Raymond Loewy, so you had that going for you as well. And Studebaker would continue station wagons, steel station wagon bodies for the rest of their automotive days. You may have noticed that earlier, however, the station wagon was a two-door. Studebaker did not get around to manufacturing a four-door station wagon until 1957. And I remember the first time I discovered this, my dad showed me a picture of one of these, and I said, wait, a two-door station wagon? He's like, yeah, a two-door station wagon? Yeah, they were a thing, and apparently they're pretty popular, but the four-door station wagon was certainly, you know, with families, much easier to get in and out of the back seat. What Studebaker did, though, they were producing the two-door wagon on the shorter wheelbase, and it was a little tight to squeeze a four-door version in there, and Studebaker was strapped for cash, so they couldn't really go to the longer wheelbase, so it had to re-engineer the entire body. So it always struck you, if you see a 5789 or a 5758 Studebaker wagon, you notice the doors always look really narrow as they're trying to squeeze it to make the four-door on the two-door station wagon body. Now, Studebaker was also looking at taking the next step with hardtop body design and looking at a four-door hardtop for 1957. And the four-door hardtop, as we mentioned, okay, the two-door hardtop, you have frameless windows and no B-pillar. The four-door hardtop, as many competing brands made, you know, four doors, no window frames, and complete openness from the A-pillar all the way back to the rear C-pillar. Studebaker looked at that. They elected not to put it into production, which is a shame because I think this is an incredibly attractive vehicle built on I think they made that of a 56, 57 President mock-up. But you'll notice this was created, I'm pretty sure, with a hacksaw and you know, some aluminum foil here, because you can see the B-pillar on the other side remaining from when they were modifying the sedan. Yeah, as I mentioned, more on station wagons in a minute here. Studebaker, however, did not stop innovating with the station wagon. That was the introduction of the sliding roof wagonair for 1963. Now, the wagonair really inspired, Brooks Stevens had experimented with this in his Skyview station wagon concept he built for Studebaker in 1961. And you can see that vehicle in the museum's galleries here. But the sliding roof was really, you know, for a company that was on the ropes for much of the 1960s, a tremendous innovation. And certainly it had a number of practical purposes. If you're out in the woods and apparently not near water, but you want to try fishing out of the back of your station wagon, you can do that. But really, the Lark Wagonair, the most versatile wagon on wheels, and it shows all the things you can do with that. You know, if you feel like looking at your telescope in the back of your station wagon, hauling a refrigerator, Christmas trees. So many things you could do with the station wagon. And unfortunately, this is kind of one of the underreported tales because Studebaker had so much drama with getting the Avanti into production in the 1963 model year. What was overlooked, they were having production problems with the Wagonair as well. In particular, sealing it for water. Anytime you cut a hole in the roof, you know, water wants to get in because water does what it does. And they had, you know, designed special weather strips and drain channels. However, you know, the drain channels would get plugged, people would end up with water, and Studebaker had to spend a fair amount of time and resources getting that right, and that also hampered Wagonair production early in the 1963 model year. So on top of that, you couldn't get the Avantis, the Wagonair was having problems. You can only imagine, you know, sorry Studebaker dealers, here's our two top products, our new things for 1963, which we can't get to you for a while we fix the bugs in them, and, you know, part of the tragic tale. But Wagonairs really have a cult following today, and people, you know, it's the station wagon culture, and GM took another run at it in one of their vehicles a few years ago with the sliding roof feature, and didn't really catch on any better than the Wagonair did, but certainly unique, you know, again, from the fertile minds, the advanced thinking of the Studebaker Corporation. And I added this last bit here because we see in 61, Studebaker introduced the new Lark Cruiser, and they also introduced a new feature, not really a body style, but certainly a body feature, the sliding sunroof. And we have a 62 Daytona hardtop in the collection with the sliding sunroof. These were made by Goldie from Germany, and you know, it wasn't that much tooling to actually make those. You just cut a hole in the roof, you had to design a new headliner, mount all that thing in there, and these were available on 61, 62, and 63 models. They looked at offering it for the 64s and eventually decided not to. But we're getting towards the tail end of the talk here, but I noticed putting this program together is you went from open cars to, well, suddenly we're trying to find ways to, you know, provide more protection and be more inside our cars. And then when we achieve that, then we're introducing the hardtop to mimic an open car. And then, you know, convertibles are catching on again in the 1950s. Everyone watched a convertible thing. Oh, let's cut a hole in the roof so we can, you know, have that open air motoring too. It seems like we got what we wanted, and then we decided, oh, I guess we wanted this a little more going the other way. But certainly that's our trip down Studebaker and automotive and horse-drawn body styles. And again, I'm sorry we didn't get too far through the body style book here. We'll have to do that for another time. And also, Pat said definitely finish this up by 2:30 if you can at all possible. So with that, I'd be happy to field questions right now. Does anyone have any questions?
Different by design. Studebaker is. Studebaker is. Studebaker is.